Coming up today on LinkedIn News Live. In honor of National Hispanic Heritage Month, we take a look at the economic and cultural powerhouse that is the Latinx community. Baden Co's Hernan Sáenz joins us to break down the numbers, and then we'll hear from the first Latina Marvel writer on being a trailblazer in the comic world. Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. It's October 15th, and here's a quick look at the top stories that are trending right now on LinkedIn. There's a troubling reality in America's healthcare data. The use of software intended to link patients to treatments is filled with racial bias. That's according to a report out from STAT, which found that multiple algorithms used by hospitals brought racial bias into decision-making. The result is that Black and Hispanic patients are being overlooked for medical treatment, while less sick white patients are receiving care. Dropbox is announcing they will become, quote, virtual first. That means their 3,000 employees will continue to work remotely most of the time, although will occasionally go into the office for team building work. While many tech companies are allowing employees to continue to work from home during the pandemic, Dropbox is one of the first to say that virtual first will be the new normal going forward. And in other tech news, Airbnb has a party problem. As the pandemic closes down venues, professional party promoters are transforming short-term rentals into makeshift nightclubs equipped with DJs, bottle service, and the real problem, hundreds of partygoers. The issue has the potential of spooking investors as the startup takes its second shot at an IPO. For more stories like these, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed, or if you're in mobile, click into the search box. In honor of National Hispanic Heritage Month, which celebrates its last day on the calendars today, but not the last day in our hearts, we want to hear from you. Who is your favorite Latinx trailblazer and why? Put your answer in the comments and we'll read a few of them on the show. Is it Justice Sonia Sotomayor? That's my favorite. Jennifer Lopez, Robert Clemente. Let us know your vote and we'll talk about this at the end of today's show. The Latin American community is thriving in this country. A recent report out from the Latino Donor Collaborative shows that Latinos are not just growing America's workforce, but contributing to America's income growth and unprecedented rates, which means that investing in U.S. Latinos is not just an equitable choice, but an economically smart one as well. Joining me now is Baden Co's Hernan Sáenz, who's going to break down the numbers for us and have a conversation about that on the show. Hernan, welcome.
Thank you, Caroline. Delighted to be here.
All right, let's start with the numbers. Why is the Latino community such a powerhouse economically for this country?
Yeah, sort of, if you close your eyes and just listen to the numbers, right, they are just enormous, right? So if you take the Latino GDP contribution, it's about $2.6 trillion. Now, what does that mean? Well, if that was a country, it would be the largest 8th country in the world. It would be larger than South Korea, than Brazil, than Italy. And so it is enormous, but let's put size aside and let's talk a little bit about growth. Prior to COVID, that economic cohort was growing the economic input and output at about 9%. That would actually be the fastest growing country in the top 10. And so that just gives you a sense of the size of this, right? And it is consumption, it is labor force participation, it is net new businesses, et cetera.
And there's a lot of talk right now about diversifying the executive space, but I want to take a look at this chart that we have from a study from UMass Amherst, which shows that the Latino population really is the largest minority group in the US, but they don't make up the numbers in the C-suite. You specialize in corporate transformation. What can companies do to change this?
It is a great question, Caroline. Let me actually start not with corporations, but with education. So we have an educational attainment gap. A Latino is half as likely as their white counterpart to have a college education. That's either 2 years or 4 years. We are 22% likely to have a college attainment versus 47%. If we don't have education, we are not going to make it into the C-suite. We are not going to make it into the boards. We're not going to make it into the top of organizations. So number one, we have to fix the educational problem. And that's a segmented one, right? It's different in Florida, from in New York, from other states. We got to make sure that it is affordable, et cetera. But does that actually mean that companies and corporations can't do things differently? No, absolutely not. They can, and they should, and it's good business too. So what do they have to do? What can they do? The big thing is to build what I call pipelines of talent, pipelines of diverse talent. What does that mean? That means bringing in diverse talent, your recruiting engine, your onboarding engine, training and developing that talent, and ultimately, quote unquote, breaking the glass ceiling, making sure that that diverse talent makes it to the top. Why is it so hard? Because you haven't seen those profiles at the top before. And so what I say is take a chance on a different type of talent that may not look like the ones in the past, but is equally capable and will actually deliver what you want.
And you're talking about education. Let's talk a little bit about the education that happens within corporate America. So much is being talked about right now about anti-racial bias training, diversity training. We don't hear a lot about training specifically for the Latinx community. How do we change that? Why is that?
Well, it's a great question, right? So there's a lot of talk about DEI in companies, and the problem is that DEI shows up in websites, it shows up in marketing, it doesn't show up in the real world. And so what do we actually need to do, right? We need core processes in companies to be actually serving everyone. So we need to bring in Latinos, we need to bring in Blacks, we need to bring in women, and then we need to train and develop them. And what does that mean, right? On the one hand, it's making sure that people can consume that they understand the importance of that they actually participate actively, and then making sure that it is valuable to them, meaning that something happened because they went to that. And so to me, right, I believe, and I'm helping companies not only think about, once you have the people, it's a big celebration, but how do you train them in a way that they actually internalize everything and then feel like that made a big difference for them? And I think that's what it matters. It's not the existence of the training programs, it's actually the impact of the training programs that matters.
Hernan, I'm going to go ahead and say hello to some members who are joining us in the stream right now. Florence from Chicago, Jose from Florida, Giselle from New York City, Isabel from Texas, and Stephanie from Ohio. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. If you're just joining us, Hernan from Bain & Co. and I are having a little Hispanic Heritage Month party virtually. I hope that you'll join us. If you have questions for Hernan, let us know in the stream. Hernan, let's talk a little bit about COVID and how it's disproportionately impacting the Latino community, particularly women. What is the economic ripple effects going to be of this?
Yeah, let's first talk about the numbers, right? If you are a Latino, you were twice as likely to lose your job. If you are a Latino, you were 3 times as likely as your white counterpart to get sick, 6 times as likely to die. So what has happened? Well, 50% of Latinos have actually dipped into their savings. 20% of Latinos have pulled money to actually help their friends and family actually pay bills. 10% of Latinos had to get personal loans as a way to pay bills. The CARES Act was meant to also help Latinos. We didn't access it in the same way that the rest of the population did. Why? Financial literacy, and we don't have the banking relationships. So what is the economic ripple effect? Well, it's going to depend on 3 variables. Number 1, the health crisis. When can we solve it? Number 2, the government. How much money do they put in to help the Latino community and the rest of the population? And number 3, the economic recovery. How quickly can we pick up? How quickly do consumers go out there? How quickly do sectors reopen in hospitality, etc.? Now, if you read the State of the Wealth report from NAREP at Latitude, right, one of the really fun things, one of the fun factors is how incredibly resilient, optimistic, and entrepreneurial the Hispanic community is. So I myself am optimistic that once the recovery comes, the cohort is going to really jump in.
A part of this problem is pay. Latina Equal Pay Day is coming up just in a couple weeks here. What do we need to do specifically to get more money in the hands of Latinas?
Well, well, first of all, Latinas are an economic powerhouse, right? 80% of Latino households have one economic decision maker. That is the Latina. Latinas are consuming in the economy. Latinas are participating in the labor force. Latinas are entrepreneurs. How do we get more money in the house of the Latinas? First of all, education. We want all those women in the labor force, but we want them with a higher level of educational attainment. That will mean bigger jobs, more pay, more consumption. That's good for everyone. The other thing we need to do is we need to get more capital to Latina and Latino-owned businesses. We have 5.5 million U.S. Latino businesses in the United States. That's 1 for every household. Latinos are extraordinarily entrepreneurial, but that is an undercapitalized sector. If we can actually capitalize that sector, there's going to be tremendous economic growth for the United States and more money in the hands of those Latinas that you were asking about.
Well, Hernan, I'm seeing some members in the stream. Very appreciative that you're here with us on LinkedIn News Live. Luis says we definitely need more diverse talent. Florence says, I agree. Companies, especially HR recruiting, need to pull more diverse slates of candidates. Hernan, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about you. You came into the workforce in the mid-90s where we weren't exactly as progressive on all these diversity trainings and how we think about these issues. What helped you get ahead?
It's a great question. First of all, I'm going to recognize that there's luck and serendipity in all of our careers, but you also make your own luck. And so how did I get to make my own luck? First of all, I picked the right firm, right? I joined Bain & Company 23 years ago, and I joined it for one reason. I felt that the way they treated talent, the way they thought about talent was different from any other firm I had ever seen. And I was right. Right, Bain & Company has always emphasized diversity. They have always developed people. They have always allowed people to be themselves. In the context of that company, being a Latino was great. It made me different. It was not something I had to think about. It was something that was celebrated. So I could be my authentic self. Not only was I in the right firm, I could be my authentic self. I didn't have to waste energy thinking about how to fit. And number three, I always figured out ways to connect. So the reality was I was a Latino, and in the world that I was moving and have moved, I was working in a non-Latino world. That means I need to understand the assumptions, the backgrounds, what people are interested in. I need to find common ground and connect. And those were the three things that really propelled my career.
Is there any specific advice that you may have for business consultants or business leaders in the stream right now who are facing prejudice in modern day?
But it's a great question. Let me just give advice at the highest level, right? The biggest piece of advice is Latino has been an important part of who I am in every way, as a dad, as a husband, personally, professionally, etc. It's not in one way my aspirations. I don't intend to be the best Latino. I intend to be the best at whatever it is that I am doing. And so number one piece of advice is shoot to be the best. Number two, right? Latino is never an excuse. Latino is always an opportunity. It is a way to be different, and different is good. So what is my other advice? Again, pick the right firm. Go to a place that celebrates diversity and be authentic, be yourself. Another advice that you don't hear that often, find the right supervisor. People are looking for mentors. They are looking for sponsors, for personal boards of directors. That's all important. But the day-to-day person that is your supervisor needs to be in your corner. That is really important. And the last thing is find that connective tissue. You are a Latino moving around in a world that has a lot of Latinos, but is still a non-Latino world. What is the connective tissue that you're going to find? What is the common ground?
That is such a great point about knowing who your supervisor or manager is. I remember earlier on in my career when I was switching firms a lot, I never asked or thought to ask who is my manager going to be. But as you know very well, having that champion in your corner is so critical in your career. So thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to say hello to some more members who are joining us in the stream. Miriam from Florida, Tanya from New Jersey, Miguel from Dallas, Derek from Wisconsin. Thank you for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. And if you're just joining us, we have a question for you. We're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, and we want to know, who is your favorite Latinx trailblazer? Let us know your vote in the stream right now, and we'll have a conversation about this at the end of today's show. So Hernan, before I let you go, you have to answer this question as well. Who is your favorite trailblazer?
I'll answer it in two ways. Every Latino that wakes up every day with a sense of dignity about their job and works hard and is a role model for family and friends and serves their community, that's my hero. And I see those heroes every day. I see them in the fields, in construction sites, in a restaurant, and in my office. And those are my heroes. But you know, I have enormous appreciation for Sol Trujillo. You might know Sol as the co-founder of Latitude. But Sol got his start, right, in East High School in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And his parents taught him to work hard. He had the grit, the ambition, and the confidence to become eventually the first ever CEO of a Fortune 200 company that was a Latino. He's been a CEO in 3 continents, and yet he's never forgotten his roots and his grit and his confidence and his sense of service to the community. And so he represents a little bit of the best of who we are.
That's a great one. Hernan, I actually can't let you go just yet because we have a question from Rachel in the stream. She wants to know, how do you think about the difference between equality and equity during the recruiting process, especially as it pertains to hiring underrepresented minorities?
It's a great question, right? And it brings this debate of is it percentages or is it numbers, et cetera. And I think that debate misses the big point. It misses the big point. And so what I've always said is if I don't see a recruiting pipeline that looks like the population, I have actually failed. And I tell that to in my firm, and I said that to my clients and the people that I work with. I want to see recruiting pipelines that look exactly like the population. And by the way, there isn't a trade-off in quality. In fact, if you are more diverse, you're actually going to get better quality. And so, what do I fight for? Both equity and equality. Which brings me to the last point, right? We talk a lot about D and E, and not a lot of people talk about I. And I actually believe that inclusion is one of the most important things out there that does not get measured and that needs to get measured. Because ultimately, if people feel included, they bring themselves and the best of themselves to work. And we have a lot of things that have nothing to do with discrimination, with equality, but they have to do with inclusion. And so companies that are actually that win the inclusion battle are going to win in the market.
So recruiting pipelines that look like the population and focusing more on inclusion. I can't think of a better way to end our conversation. Hernan, thank you so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. I know I speak for the stream when I say I learned a lot.
Thank you for what you're doing, and let's continue celebrating this very special month all year.
Absolutely. That was Hernan Saez talking to us a little bit about how the economic powerhouse is just so big for the Latino community. And now that we've heard from Hernan, we're going to hear from one of the Latina community's stars, Gabby Rivera. She is the first Latina writer for Marvel. I sat down with her before the pandemic, and I started by asking her how she got into her career in writing.
Growing up, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I loved writing. So I always wrote. I wrote short stories. I wrote in my journal. I wrote poetry. But I didn't think that you could like be a writer, like that seemed way outside of the realm of possibility. And then when I had graduated from college, I looked out into the world and we had that recession in 2006. And on top of that, my gender presentation was changing. I went from definitely being more feminine looking to cutting my hair and looking more visibly queer. And not for nothing, but people did not want a in their workplace. Like they don't want to hire you at the mall, they don't want to hire you at the school. I was scared that like there was no room for me anywhere. And so in that fear, uh, I turned into myself. I was like, well, what can I do? Where can I make a path for myself? And that was in the writing. That was in completing my first book, Juliet Takes a Breath,
You mentioned that writing you didn't think was in the realm of possibility as something that you could do for your career. Tell us more why you didn't feel like it was a possibility for you.
Well, I mean, I think, my mother, I love my mother so much. She was a teacher for like 30 something years in the New York City public schools. My mother uh, taught me how to read and write. My dad was a salesman, like very like traditional, typical kind of like American situation, right? But, you know, I was like the only person writing and the only person kind of really invested in creative like stuff like that, And so I didn't see anybody in my family writing. And then the writers, right? Like Stephen King or like Judy Blume or, who I love, right? Who's here at Makers, right? That seemed like fancy white people stuff. Like I hate to say it like that, but that seemed, I might as well say I'm going to win the lottery when I grow up. You know what I mean? It just seemed inaccessible. And how do you even do that? It wasn't until I started connecting with other writers, like there was the New York City Latina Writers Group. I started going to the New Eurekan Poets Cafe. I started going to open mics all over Manhattan and seeing people of color and seeing other folks, gay folks, like owning the stage and writing their stories and sharing their work. It wasn't until I saw them that I was like, oh, okay. okay, I can do this. I got this. Maybe a little bit.
And you were the first Latina to write for Marvel. Walk us through how you started working with them.
I am the first Latina to write for Marvel. Listen, like I told my story through my first novel, Juliet Takes a Breath. And that was like indie published. It got a little buzz, and someone at Marvel read it. Like Will Moss, an editor at Marvel, read that book. He was trying to find someone to tell the solo series for a character called America Chavez. And America Chavez is a portal punching Latina lesbian in the Marvel multiverse, you know? And so they liked my voice and they asked me to write her solo series. And so I did. And that's also a moment when you get an opportunity to do something that you've never done before and it scares you and you just do it anyway. You just run towards it. I had never written a comic before. Like I hit the ground running. And so, yeah, I got to do America Chavez's solo series.
So you walk in there, you're the first Latina to write for Marvel, you're the only Latina there. How did that show up for you? Where did you find the confidence?
The confidence was hard to come by at first. It was very like intimidating. A lot of people wanted me to fail. And I think for some people, they think I did. You know what I mean? Like, and that's their perception. Again, for me, it was like my community is telling me that I belong here and I deserve this and like to write the best story that I possibly could. I wanted to offer, and I did offer America Chavez things that were important to me, like healing and family and an ancestral plane so that she could look up into the sky and see the history of her people, you know, like unfiltered and majestic. The confidence is, again, something that I build every day and something that like my peers and the kids who are reading America keep giving to me and keep showing me like that they need this story and they want her story.
What would you say is kind of the overall goal right now with all the creative work that you're doing?
Oh, I want to be as like bouncy and fat and queer and Puerto Rican as I can possibly be, like all day, every day. Put it in all my stories. Like, be so damn joyful. It makes the haters sick. And everybody else, it just fills them with that good energy. Because it's not about just me, right? Like, I don't want to be the first and last Latina to write for Marvel. I want everyone to come through. Gatekeepers open those gates and let in the Black trans women and the non-binary folks and the people with disabilities and the Native indigenous folks who have so many stories to tell as well. Like, you know, it's not about just saying you're the only one. It's about saying, yes, you matter, you exist, and let's bring the whole family.
And for those who are watching right now who don't see themselves in the career path that they want to take or are intimidated to go after something, what do you say to them?
Oh, I say don't. It doesn't even matter. You should go out and be as messy and vulnerable as you possibly can. You just have to try. You have to try and complete a work or something that is important to you. You don't got to write for anybody else but yourself, your mother, your friends, your neighborhood. Like at the end of the day, it's your voice that matters and we need you. And listen, there are people there are like white men who have messed up a million times, who have made movies that have bombed, that have done terrible, and they still get more shots. So like whatever you put out into the world, as long as you believe in it and you know that that's your truth, put it out, share it. We want you, we need you.
And when you think about the future, what the writing community is going to look like, what the creative space is going to look like moving forward, what makes you optimistic about the direction that we're heading?
I think what makes me optimistic is that there are more folks, people of color that are getting involved in not just the writing and the creation, but like the publishing and the distribution and the behind the scenes, like not just the actors, but also the writers, producers, directors, like finding all the different avenues to get into that process, right? So not just, you know, yes, be the secretary, right? Of course, but also be the CEO and also, you know, connecting to folks on so many different levels. Like, and the young kids are pissed and they're ready to take over. And I'm like, please take it, burn it all down, build it up anew, and put your legacies out into the world.
That was Gabby Rivera, author and story writer for Marvel, speaking to me earlier this year at the Makers Conference. Her energy is just so contagious, and I loved what she had to say about the next generation. Okay, earlier on in the show, we asked you who your favorite Latinx trailblazer was, and I'm going to read some of those comments now. We got so many. I heard from Nina, who says Justice Sotomayor, one kick-butt Puerto Rican. Rose says her father, who worked hard and showed kindness to those around him. Aslan says Carlos Rodriguez from ADP. Miriam says Maria Hinojosa, NPR journalist. Ellie says AOC is the best. Melissa says there are too many to name. And Steven says, Caroline, your producer, Nina Ibarra, my favorite Latina trailblazer. I'm a big fan of Nina, and you too, Steven. Thank you for joining us. All right, this is LinkedIn News Live. Tomorrow, my colleague, Andrew Seaman, will be sitting down with Ebony Joyce, founder of Next Level Career Services, for tips and tricks on landing the job you love. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thank you for watching LinkedIn News Live.